my background, I got my master's at The Ohio State University in fisheries and wildlife biology, and spent some time working up at an NGO in Northwest Ohio. So got to know several parts of the region, and I've been traveling back there most years ever since, whether it be for trainings for some of our citizen science programs or for little vacations like checking out the biggest week in American birding up on the Lake Erie shoreline. So thrilled to be here remotely with you and have your attention for the next hour or so, talk a little bit about monarchs. I'm going to share my screen here, but if you have immediate questions, feel free to pipe in real quick or type them in the chat box. And I know Ann and Nicole are keeping an eye on that chat box for me. I'll just pop my screen up here for you. So today we're here to talk about the monarch butterfly conservation and citizen science, and bring that all together, kind of bring that home really to Ohio and how it's applicable there where you are. I want to start first by talking a little bit about the Monarch Joint Venture. If you're not familiar with it already, the Monarch Joint Venture is a partnership organization of about 85 agencies, nonprofits, and for-profits who are connected together under this kind of umbrella of monarch conservation. So you'll see all these logos in front of you. The partnership's been around for 20 or so years now. And what's amazing is the diversity of partnerships. There's geographic diversity. So we have people from East Coast to West Coast, north to south in the United States. And we have all kinds of different levels and sizes of organizations, everything from government organizations like the USGS, who are working with us on large, broad-scale projects, to some more locational specific organizations, like the Native Plant Society of Texas or places like that, who can work with audiences that are a little more local. So through that, we have a great partnership and a lot of opportunity to conduct a lot of work toward monarch research and restoration and education under one umbrella of a conservation plan.
Jennifer, this is Ann. Everything looks great and sounds great, but if you could speak up just a little bit, I think that would be helpful. Sorry to interrupt.
Thank you for letting me know. So the Monarch Joint Venture has, in addition to building those partnerships across the country, we have 3 foundational pillars. So we conduct and support habitat restoration. So those are projects like we'll have small grants to help fund things like little habitat projects on the ground, or getting pollinator gardens established at certain places, or even helping some organizations. We'll have a grant that we had a grant in Iowa that helped the Iowa Department of Natural Resources create a greenhouse so that they could grow more milkweed plugs for their restoration efforts. And so those are a couple ways that we work in kind of the habitat conservation realm. Another pillar that the Monarch Joint Venture has is its educational pillar. So we provide a lot of educational opportunities, work with a lot of educational programs, develop coursework, and participate in a lot of conferences and programming on the education side. And then we also have a science pillar where this kind of citizen science component falls in. We conduct a lot of research and monitoring and promote certain citizen science programs. So let's start with a little background about the monarch butterfly. This talk will focus mostly on the citizen science programs. And so I'm not going to go into great detail about the monarch butterfly's biology and background and things like that, but we'll talk about some resources at the end if you're interested in learning a lot more about the ins and outs of monarch biology. We've got resources available for you. The monarch scientific name is Stanaeus plexippus, and it evolved in North America. So it migrates north and south depending on the season. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute here. But you'll see on this map that it's spread beyond the North America at this point now. That's because occasionally these monarchs migrated off course. And so they'd get like facilitated by the wind, caught up in storms. They would end up across the Atlantic or the Pacific on these different islands, but they didn't have the right habitat, the certain plant, this milkweed plant that they needed to breed. And so for a very long time, they were not established in those areas. But as of about the mid 1800s, after humans started both intentionally and unintentionally facilitating the spread of certain milkweed species, the milkweed got established on some islands and got established in northern Africa. And so then after that time, when monarchs blew off course and blew to these islands and blew over to Spain and northern Africa, they were actually able to reproduce. And so now there are viable populations of monarchs well beyond North America. Now this little dotted line just showed up on the map, and that separates the eastern from the western population in North America. A lot of what I'm going to talk about today is mostly applicable to the eastern population, and so that would be the population that lives and breeds and migrates east of the Rocky Mountains. There's also a western population that does all those things on the western side of the Rocky Mountains. There's a little bit of crossover that's been documented, so it's not completely isolated populations from each other, but more or less the western population stays over there on the western side and overwinters in California, and then the population on the eastern side of the Rockies migrates down to Mexico in the winter and then back up to eastern North America for the spring, summer, and fall. Monarchs undergo a complete metamorphosis. That means in their life cycle, they go through 4 different stages, including the egg, larva, pupa, and adult. And that whole transformation from egg to adult takes more or less a month. It is weather dependent, so it's slower in the cold, it's faster in the warm. And central to all of those life phases is one plant. That's the milkweed plant. It's the only plant on which monarch caterpillars can breed. It's the only one that the adults lay their eggs on. It's the only plant that the caterpillars can eat. And adults also use milkweed as the nectar resources, although adults can nectar on a whole variety of flora. They do nectar on milkweed as well. So a lot of you probably already know that monarchs have a really interesting annual life cycle too. So in addition to that 4 phases of metamorphosis there and that cyclical life cycle, we have the migration that occurs. I'll focus here on the eastern population. In this annual life cycle in the fall, there's a massive migration of what's called the 4th generation. This is the last generation of monarchs that was born or bred during the calendar year. And in the fall, they all migrate south. These are individual monarchs going all the way from southern Canada, from the upper Midwest, flying all the way down to central Mexico. And once in central Mexico, they cluster together in the mountains in a specific type of tree called the Oyamel fir tree. And I've got that on the next slide if you want to write that down. So they cluster in the Oyamel fir trees, and they're stationary through most of the winter, and more or less, it's not technically a hibernation, but they're very inactive there until the spring. And then in the spring, when it starts to warm up again, the monarchs leave Mexico and begin flying north. So these are still the same individuals that flew all the way down in the fall from as far north as southern Canada. Now they're turning around, they're flying back up to the southern US, and there they lay their eggs. So this is when they lay their eggs and those eggs hatch. That's called the 1st generation, because it's the 1st generation that was born that year. So this is around March and April. And then that 1st generation continues to migrate northward and lay eggs for a 2nd, 3rd, and a 4th generation. And in the fall, that all starts over again. So as you might expect, monarchs have a variety of needs throughout their life cycle. During the winter months, here's where I've spelled out the OML fir, if you wanted that spelling. They need these OML fir trees in central Mexico for their overwintering grounds. These fir trees help protect them. There's been really cool studies on how they utilize these trees, and even within the specific tree, they roost at specific heights, kind of in the middle of the trees, and that enables them to be better buffered against the elements. In the West, where they overwinter in California, they may use eucalyptus trees or Monterey pines and Monterey cypresses. So different types of trees that they overwinter in on the West Coast. Throughout the breeding season, milkweed remains a critical component of the habitat. So developing larvae only eat milkweed, adults only lay eggs on it. And then during the fall and spring migration, as well as throughout the breeding season, nectar resources are extremely important fuel sources for monarchs. So they continue to need nectar sources through the duration of that breeding season. It's important to think about the availability of nectar resources being available as soon as monarchs get here. You might have noticed monarchs in your area maybe in early May, and we want to make sure that there's nectar resources available from then all the way through their fall migration. You might have heard a bit about the monarch population decline. So our best...
Jennifer, I'm sorry, before you get to that, we've got a couple questions that relate to that last couple of slides.
All right.
One was on the butterfly, the migratory pathway. Butterfly migrates south and then north to breed. How long do they live? The same butterfly migrates south and north, and then how long do they live?
Yeah, so the monarch that migrates and overwinters, that fall monarch, that can live 6 to 7 months. The other generations that are moving northward are typically 2 to 4 weeks.
And then somebody asked about the migratory pathway or path of expatriate monarchs.
I'm not familiar with that term.
Yeah.
Outside the States?
Yeah, I don't know, Greg, if you want to unmute and let us know that question. Maybe we'll get clarification later. And then while we're waiting on that, does milkweed crowd out native plants in areas where it is non-native?
It does. There's some research, particularly out of southern Spain, about some non-native milkweeds that can be crowding out the native nectar resources and kind of a concern for other butterfly species. Additionally, there are concerns in southern US where people are planting non-native milkweeds that bloom year-round. The most common one is called tropical milkweed, and that has a variety of concerns, some related to diseases that are more prevalent in those areas, but also can become problematic by crowding out native resources.
Okay, and then last on this section, for 2 years, I've only had 4th generation larvae butterflies. Is there a reason? I never get this in spring and early summer.
Mm-hmm. I can't tell you exactly why on your site. It may be that they're easier to find because there's more. What we do know is that there are the fewest monarchs of the year during that beginning part of the year, because there's been a lot of mortality over that fall migration and then additional mortality while they're migrating back north. And so the summer breeding season is really their opportunity to beef up, to grow that population. And so during that 4th generation, late in the summer, that's really when there are the most monarchs around in our area. So that's when you're most likely to find them.
And I did mean for expatriate monarchs, those that ended up in Spain or the Western Pacific once they got milkweed to eat.
Yeah. African ones because there is some migration there, a shorter migration. I don't know a whole lot about there's populations in Australia and New Zealand as well, and I won't speak to those. There's non-migratory populations in Hawaii that stay there.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Anne, for bringing those questions. I'll talk real quick about the declining population. The easiest way to estimate the monarch's population, at least east of the Rockies in North America, is to go to their overwintering grounds. That's where they're all clustered really tightly together. And you'll see on this graph, the y-axis is called area occupied in hectares. So we're not counting individual monarchs. We're not saying there's 400,000 monarchs out there and we want to see 500,000. We're actually measuring an area of Oyamel fir trees that is covered by monarchs. And so they've been doing that since the mid-1990s, and you can see this steady decline. Why the decline? In the late 1900s, for the most part, that was attributed to the loss of overwintering habitat. There was a lot of illegal logging occurring on those overwintering grounds, or even legal logging back before there were protections. And so that was leading to a large amount of the decline in the late 1900s. Since the 2000s, there have been a lot more conservation efforts and partnerships that have helped alleviate that issue and dramatically reduce the amount of illegal logging in those areas and established protective zones. There's a monarch butterfly biosphere reserve that's protected in a couple kind of buffer zones in a couple different ways. And they've involved the community in a variety of ways in decision-making and protections in that area. Another major factor in decline of the monarch population is the loss of their breeding habitat. So up here in the States where they're breeding, specifically milkweed plants, they have grown historically pretty well in corn and soy ag fields until the last 10 or 15 years when those ag fields have switched over to a lot, like over 90% of genetically modified herbicide tolerant crops. So when those crops are sprayed, the crops do fine, but the milkweed does not. And so there's been a substantial loss of milkweed from within our agricultural fields. And that's direct loss of breeding habitat. So that little image in the middle just switched over to a sad milkweed that was trying to grow between some soybean rows. And this is a couple weeks after the herbicide was applied. And that's no longer available resource to monarchs. There's also other factors that contribute to their decline. We won't go into detail, but there's direct mortality associated with pesticides, insecticides, there's vehicular collisions, there's direct predation by others, and then the spread of disease, particularly Ophryscystis electroscura. We'll talk about a citizen science program later on that addresses that. So to address those, the declining population, a bunch of monarch researchers and biologists formed a group to get together and say, you know, what do we need to know? What kind of goals should we set to ensure that monarchs don't go extinct, basically? So that was a trinational group of conservationists and biologists who ran the numbers, basically took the best information we have about populations, monarch populations overwintering Mexico, and came to the conclusion that we need to shoot for a long-term goal of 6 hectares of overwintering monarchs. And that number came from population viability analyses that showed that there's below that threshold, if there's consistently less than 6 hectares of overwintering monarchs, there's a significant increase in the likelihood that the population won't recover from stressors. So if we have dramatic weather events, if we have dramatic disease events, if there's less than 6 hectares of overwintering population, then they're much more likely to basically spiral downward and not be able to recover. So in 2014, the monarch was petitioned under the Endangered Species Act. That decision is a multi-year process, and it's also been formally delayed. Originally, we were supposed to find out last June, and now they're collecting, Fish and Wildlife Service is collecting more information, and will be making this decision in December of this year. There's also been some research on, what do we need to do to support 6 hectares of overwintering monarchs? And the national goal now, or tri-national goal, is to add 1.3 billion more milkweed stems on the ground. So that's something that a lot of states have kind of divvied up among themselves. There are certain groups of organizations that have kind of run the numbers to see which state could be responsible for how many more milkweed stems on the ground. So it's a really neat way that the monarch community is coming together to take responsibility for what's needed on the ground. So this brings us to the importance of data. We're looking at a lot of numbers here. We're looking at sizes of populations and milkweed stems and population viability analyses. And so where's all this information coming from? And why is it important? So collecting data on all these factors is important for us to update population models. We want to track our progress toward those goals. Are we getting close to 1.3 billion additional milkweed stems? How do we evaluate habitat quality? What can we do to refine best management practices? We want to better understand climate change and how it affects monarchs. And of course, there's disease and parasites that affect monarchs too. And so there's a lot of information out there that can be collected that can be very useful to kind of predicting where we're going with regard to the monarch population and better understanding how to effectively conserve the landscape that we can. So some of the first citizen science, the first citizen science program for monarchs was kind of a product of Fred and Nora Urquhart. And these two set up basically a way to tag monarchs and track where they went. Fred grew up outside of Toronto. He attended Toronto University and was a professor at the university, as well as the zoological director at the Royal Ontario Museum. And ever since he was a kid, he was interested in monarchs and wondered where they went in the winter. And so he spent many, many years trying to figure out, how can you track that? How can you figure out where a monarch is going when they disappear from your landscape for months at a time? And he started tagging them. He thought, if I can tag this monarch and somebody else can stickers that were made to stick to glass worked well to stay on the monarch but not affect their flight. And so using that technology, he was able to tag lots and lots of monarchs and create this program to track them. And so Fred and Nora put out a whole lot of kind of press releases and announcements, because obviously if you're releasing these monarchs out into the landscape, you need someone who finds it to know what to do with it. So they recruited up in the northern US people to put out these tags. And then suspecting that these monarchs were going very, very far south, they also put out a lot of advertisements throughout Mexico to try to get people interested in finding the monarchs. And so they actually did, one of their advertisements in Mexico got picked up by kind of an adventurer guy named Kenneth Brugger, and he and his wife responded to that plea for help, and ultimately in the end ended up finding out where one of these monarch roosting sites was. So from there, and that was the mid 1970s, that citizen science program was able to really bring a great wealth of information to the scientific community. This map here is from a peer-reviewed publication by Fred and Nora Urquhart, who took that information on where these monarchs were headed and published it. This paper showed that monarchs that were tagged a little further east of the Great Plains tended to be found on the east side of this mountain range in Mexico. And monarchs that were tagged a little further west, right in the Great Plains, tended to be found on the west side of the mountain range. And so we're starting to develop some trends here and better understand monarchs because of this citizen science program. So the next evolution of that program is what's called Monarch Watch. So today, this is the tagging program that exists. It's existed since the early 90s. It's housed out of the University of Kansas, and it's designed to track the movement of individual monarchs. This is for the Eastern population only. There are other programs in the West that'll just give you different stickers, but it's the same concept. So Monarch Watch is a program that any citizen science can be involved with. And it's a really easy introduction to citizen science with monarchs. You need minimal prior knowledge. There are resources on their website to help you learn what you need to know. You need to know how to tell a male from a female monarch. You need to know what a monarch is in order to capture it and not a look-alike, because there are butterflies that look similar to monarchs. So training is pretty quick. You can get trained by a friend in the field if you have a friend who already does this, or just read through the guidelines on their website. It can be as frequently as you want. It occurs in the fall, so they're really trying to track where this fourth generation is going in the fall. And they do that because in the winter, there are biologists specifically looking for monarchs with tags in central Mexico in those OML fir trees. And so there's a concerted effort to collect monarchs with those tags so we can ensure that we recover them. If you put them on a monarch in the spring, you're dispersing it perhaps northward where we don't have really an concentrated effort to find that monarch. And it can be a pretty quick activity. You can capture a monarch in your yard, and that'll take you, 10 or 15 minutes to put a tag on it, record some information. Or this could be an all afternoon event if you want to go out with some friends and family and tag a whole bunch of monarchs. So I want to bring some examples. I want to link these programs to peer-reviewed literature and the contributions that they're making to the scientific community. This is a map from a peer-reviewed study that used this program, so tagging from Monarch Watch, to tag monarchs in the Delmarva Peninsula. Long and short of it is that they found the monarchs that were migrating from right along the coast, so that black dot furthest to the east, those had a much smaller likelihood of arriving in Mexico. Whereas the monarchs that were tagged what they called inland, so a little further west, so inland from the bay here, had an 8 times greater chance of being found overwintering in Mexico. So there's a couple reasons for that they talk about in the paper. It might be that the fact that when they measured those monarchs that they caught on the far east coast, right along the Atlantic, they were actually smaller than the ones further west. So there's a size factor there. There's also the possibility that some of those monarchs right along the Atlantic, they end up in Florida or Cuba or other places that just aren't, where they can spend the winter, but they're not they're not in Mexico. Another citizen science program that's very simple to participate in is called Journey North. So this tracks seasonal events, and it's not specific to monarchs, but it started with the monarch focus. They track migration, phenology, and breeding. It was founded in the mid-1990s, and as of 2019, as of last year, it's housed out of the University of Wisconsin. So there's a program there. They have a coordinator who can help troubleshoot if there's issues, but it's a very simple program basically to report your monarch sighting. You can do this at any time of the year, at any stage of monarch that you find. So if you find a monarch egg or an adult or find a pupa, you want to report that. You can report that into Journey North. They do focus on getting the first sighting of the year. So when you find your first egg or you see your first adult monarch coming into the area, those are the reports that they're after. They're trying to track, the first sightings and see what kind of trends we find over the course of time. For this program, again, it's very easy to get involved with. You need minimal knowledge, just like Monarch Watch. You just need to know how to properly identify a monarch. It takes just a few minutes to train, and really training is just learning how to log into their website. You have to make these reports on their website. There's not an app, unfortunately, but you can report at will. So anytime you're out and about, you can make a note of what you saw and then enter it on the computer when you get back in front of your computer. And it can be very quick. It can be just 5 minutes to log in and say what you saw. So you'll see the website there, and highlighted in red is the button you would click on to report your sightings. You do have to make a username, that's it. It's another password to remember, but you can log in and report those sightings. And then you can pull up some interesting stuff too. You can look at maps of everybody's sightings. You can download the data. You can look at it yourself. It's a really interesting program that they've got running there, and a lot of flexibility. One of the studies out of this program showed that monarchs who are migrating south and roosting in trees along the way south, in the northern US, they tended to roost in maple trees and pines and conifers. And in the southern US, they tended to roost more in oaks and pecan trees. They also found that these roosting sites were more likely to be near water than random sites were. So it's giving us, through the citizen science program, a better understanding of what good monarch roosting habitat might look like. And another project I want to cover, I alluded to earlier with regard to Ophryscystis electroscura disease that affects monarchs. Project Monarch Health tracks the distribution of Ophryscystis electroscura, which we call OE for short. It's a protozoan that infects monarchs and queen butterflies, which is a butterfly that's closely related to monarchs that occurs in the Southwest. This disease was discovered in the late 1960s, and since then it's been found in every monarch population examined to date, including everywhere in North America, Hawaii, Australia, Cuba, and it's been spreading in the southern US. And so the citizen science program allows us to track that spread. Your prior knowledge to participate in this program, I consider it moderate. You need to be a little more familiar with capturing and handling the individual monarch. The training takes a little longer. Project Monarch Health has great videos, training videos online that'll show you how to properly handle this monarch. And you can do it at your own frequency. It could take about half an hour to participate. What you do is take a captured monarch, or it could be a monarch that you reared, and the Monarch Watch will send you this nice little kit when you sign up. They'll send you a little sticker, a clear sticker. You can watch a video to learn how to put that sticker right on the monarch's abdomen, and then peel it off real gently and put it on an index card, just like that finger in the picture is pointing to. And you'll send those index cards in to this program, and they will look at it under a microscope and see if that monarch had Ophryscystis electroscura. So you can do that with reared monarchs. You can do it with the ones that you capture in the fall while you're putting tags on them. Any individual that you want to capture, you can do this process on them and find out if they're infected. So some cool research out of this program, it shows that on average, monarchs in the northern region were less heavily infected than monarchs in the southern region. So these little squares on this map are zoomed into monarch scales. And you'll see in the southern portion, the larger scales of the monarchs with all these little dots around it. Those are the OE protozoa, and those are, they were found in higher prevalence in southern latitudes. And so that's helping us understand the distribution of this disease. And so the more information that we can collect from monarchs throughout the US, we'll be able to track that spread north and west.
Got a couple quick questions, Jennifer, before we do the input portion.
Yes.
Somebody said that they'd heard the 1.3 billion stems number before, and how many do we have now? And is this being monitored on an ongoing basis?
Yes, the 1.3 billion stems is approximately double what we have now. And by what we have now, that's based on like 2016 data. So there's about 1.3 billion stems out there right now. And there is a tracking program called the Monarch Conservation Database. It's run by the Fish and Wildlife Service, where conservation organizations are entering their efforts. So at least by the listing decision in December, the Fish and Wildlife Service will have even more accurate number of how many stems have been put on the ground in the last couple of years.
Okay, great. The next question is regarding the monitoring of those stems. And I think you kind of answered that. If these were pretty much government monitored, or if citizen science have some of the responsibility to sort of grow and monitor the milkweed.
Yeah, it's just the Fish and Wildlife Service that is housing that database, but nonprofits like conservation NGOs are entering data into that. State agencies are entering data. There's like rights of ways and energy companies that are entering data into that, all to demonstrate how much conservation activity is happening on the ground. Part of the monitoring program that I'm going to talk about next also can contribute to that database by monitoring milkweed stems and getting stem densities.
Okay, great. That covers both parts of that question. And then finally, for this part, with climate change, is there a possibility that more monarchs are overwintering in the southern U.S. rather than Mexico? Is this track?
This is group information and questions that are coming in. So she just answered that. No,
got a quick mute here. Okay, I think we're good. Go ahead.
About they're not overwintering more so further north because those oyamel fir trees in that mountain region are specifically what the monarch needs. In fact, climate change is making that a little bit worse, that area a little bit worse, because they do need those cooler temperatures in those mountains. But the resident populations in Florida are growing a little bit, and though that would be a non-migratory population.
Okay, excellent.
So I thought we'd just take a minute or two here and get some input. I know we've got tons of people on the line, and there's probably plenty of people familiar with some of the programs I just talked about. So I wondered if you either wanted to type in the chat box or pull yourself off of mute and let us know if you participated in any of these programs, where geographically you participated, what did that habitat look like?
I will say I have tagged for Monarch Watch in the past. I'm here in central Ohio, like a lot of people, and I've been planting milkweed since I moved to my new house. about 6 years ago. Of course, I get more milkweed every year and more monarchs every year. But yeah, we tagged them. I haven't had any returned, any recovered.
Okay.
But as far as the habitat, I mean, this is suburban.
Okay.
A lot of people around here, they don't plant a lot of nectar species and things, but I'm hoping, I share. I give seeds away, I give plants away when I can, and I feel like people are starting to recognize and realize that this is important stuff.
Great. Thanks, Stephanie. That's activism along with the science right there.
Mm.
Yeah, we've got several people are participating in the chat. One person day Journey North in Northeast Ohio, again, a suburban habitat, and a one-day program with the Cleveland Metro Parks along the Lake Erie coast near Cleveland.
Wonderful. So we're getting some people from some suburban landscapes. So maybe your pollinator garden might be the little oasis of monarch habitat there. We've got people in Northeast Ohio, Central Ohio. Right.
Someone's tagged for many years for Monarch Watch.
All right.
Done so with students.
Oh, what a good experience. Okay.
Someone joining us mentioned the tagging with the Beaver Creek Wetlands Association outside of Greater Dayton and at a wildflower garden preserve. So that's in the western part of the state.
Okay, so at a preserve. So we got a little bit different looking habitat there, maybe not suburban, but more like probably a more or less healthy prairie.
We've got participation in a monarch release up in Northwest Ohio in Allen County.
How fun. That's wonderful. Great. Well, I love that we've got a very involved audience here who's got some experience with this. I was wondering if we could brainstorm for a second about what other types of information would help us learn more about monarchs and the habitat. So we've talked a little bit about tagging and knowing where they go. We've talked a little bit about disease, but what other information would be helpful to answer or meet some of our data needs?
Yeah, feel free to unmute or put it in the chat. Carl asked, what plants do they use for nectar specifically?
Wonderful. Yeah, that's something that these programs I haven't talked about because these programs aren't necessarily recording them. For the tagging, the Monarch Watch, they do record the plant that you caught your monarch on. So if you did sweep your net over a particular goldenrod, you would write down that species. And so there's a little bit of information through that program about nectar plants. But you're right, Carl, in general, it would be great to know a lot more about their nectaring resources.
Would you recommend that we collect and raise caterpillars, then release, or is it better not to do that?
Rearing can be a good educational tool. I think it's a good entry-level way to get people involved and interested in monarchs. From the scientific perspective, it's not necessarily contributing to the scale of change that we need to see in their population, but it's definitely a fun activity to do and get people engaged. So it might be interesting to know more about different landscapes too. So we talked about people tagging in their suburban backyards or tagging in parks, but what we're not hearing are people who just went out to some field in the community that wasn't managed for habitat, or understanding, you see a lot of milkweed in roadsides and rights of ways, but people don't often monitor that type of habitat. So there's some data gaps we've got.
We have some other interest areas of people. David asked, is there research on predation? And that would be an interesting area.
Mm. Yes, yes. Maybe I can share this resource after the talk. There's some neat publications coming out just now out of Michigan State University on predators and the diversity of monarch predators that we just had no idea was out there, because a lot of them consume the caterpillars at night on the milkweed.
We've got just a couple more. Someone asked more of a structural, should we put nets over the milkweed to help caterpillars survive?
Okay, good question. That netting the milkweed probably wouldn't keep away the most intense predators. They're also very small. Ants do eat a lot of the eggs. Spiders will eat young caterpillars, stink bugs. So it's hard to keep out. Their primary predators are invertebrates that are basically the size of the caterpillars are smaller, so they're going to get through the nets.
Okay, and for the last question, weather, somebody was interested in the sort of yearly rather than climate change and that impact.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So how do we know, how monarchs are reacting to seasonal variation in temperature and annual variation in temperature? So that's good information to get.
And Jim, I did want to get this one in because I think it's a very practical question. Are there types of variables such as the size of the habitat patch, the plants that are available that relate to success and survival?
Aha, thanks, Jim. Thanks for bringing that up. I don't have an answer for that question. I think that's what some of these research programs can get at or are trying to get at. So I'm going to jump off from there and highlight a couple things, because these are wonderful points that the next program I'm going to talk about is helping to answer or trying to answer. So what's missing? We talked about a lot of people monitoring in prairies and parklands because it's pretty, it's easy, it's where you go to walk your dog, you're familiar with it, and you know you're going to find monarchs there. But that only gives us a limited picture of what's happening on the ground. What's going on at that old field down the road that's not managed. That's a large part of the landscape that's missing. We also had people who are in urban hotspots who are collecting data, which, that's what you do if that's where you live, and that's where most people live, myself included. But can we make an effort to collect data from areas outside of those urban hotspots? Because those are major data gaps. We also have programs that look at the individual monarch, the egg or the larvae or the adult, and collect information from it. How old was that monarch? What instar was it at its larval stage? But kind of lacks the fuller picture of where did you see that monarch? Did you see an adult monarch and report it to Journey North? Well, we don't really know if you saw that at an energy facility or a roadside or your backyard. So some sort of context of where those monarchs were observed would be helpful. So that's where the Integrated Monarch Monitoring Program comes in. This program is run out of the Monarch Joint Venture, and it's designed to be spatially balanced. So you see some red squares around southern Wisconsin here on your map. These red squares were spatially balanced. They're 10 kilometer by 10 kilometer squares to try to get a true random representative look at what's on the landscape. And so there's an effort being made to collect information in all of these, what we call priority blocks. There's also 5 land use sectors that this program is collecting information from, including agricultural fields, developed areas, protected grasslands, rights of ways, and unprotected grasslands. An unprotected grassland might just be, for example, my grandpa's back 40 or something like that. And the program collects information on both monarchs and their habitat. And so that's the attempt to answer some of those questions that were brought up by you just a few minutes ago about the landscape context or their nectar resources. Here's all the priority blocks in Ohio. So you can monitor within, we have, I won't go into too great of detail, but there's a specific way to select random sites within all those blocks. This is all on our website. We'll give you a link at the end. Or you can also do this program at a place of your choice, because not everybody has the ability to get out to some random location. So if you do have a park that you're most interested in, by all means, you can monitor, use this program at your park. The prior knowledge to participate in the program, I would consider moderate or moderate to advanced, depending on what activity you're doing. There's a couple optional activities I'll run through real quick here. It could take a couple hours to train because this monitoring occurs over a larger specific site. So it's not necessarily just walking out to your milkweed garden for a few minutes and recording information. This is actually going to a specific site and recording specific information over a specific area. So it's a little, takes a little longer to train on it. And depending on which activity you do, we recommend that you would participate weekly to monthly. It might take you 45 minutes to a couple hours to do the survey, depending on what your landscape looks like. So there's 4 optional activities within the Integrated Monarch Monitoring Program. The first optional activity is a survey of milkweed and blooming plants. And so that's the information that's going to help us track and assess our progress toward the 1.3 billion additional milkweed stems. It's also going to get us information about what are those nectar resources that are available to the monarchs, at a certain time of year. Maybe plants aren't your thing and you just really like looking at monarch eggs and larvae on milkweed. That's an optional activity too. So at your designated space, you would follow a certain method to look at eggs and larvae. There's also an adult monarch survey. That's something we recommend be conducted every 2 weeks. It might take about half an hour to walk around your site. And then if you're into rearing and you want to collect an older instar, an older caterpillar from your site and rear it to see if it's parasitized or not, then you can contribute in that way. That's another optional activity. I just want to point out that this is designed to be compatible with existing citizen science programs. So it's not completely novel and separate. What it is trying to fill in some data gaps. And so the Egg and Larvae Survey is compatible with a program called the Monarch Larvae Monitoring Project that's been around for over a decade. The Adult Monarch Survey is compatible with a lot of different types of monarch butterfly survey or general butterfly surveys that occur. And the survival and parasitism activity is compatible with a couple other programs, including the Project Monarch Health that we talked about earlier. So we're helping to grow those data sets while also filling data gaps. A little deeper dive into these optional activities so you can decide if any of them appeal to you. The activity 1 is the Milkweed and Blooming Plant Survey. This is a picture of somebody doing it. It occurs along a transect on your survey site, and you need either a tablet. We have an app where you can enter your information, or you record it on a data sheet like this woman is doing. And you have this little survey frame of a specific size. It might take 1 to 4 hours, depending on maybe how diverse your site is and how many plants you need to write down. And we recommend to do it about monthly. These are just recommendations. So if you get to your site 1 or 2 times a year, that's fine too. You can still submit data. So you have a specific area. This is a rectangle that's 1 hectare. And you would walk up and down a couple transects, recording milkweed and blooming plant data along those transects throughout your survey area. Our second optional activity, we call it activity 2, that's the Egg and Larvae Survey. That's something that we recommend you do weekly. Again, not required, but just recommended because the reproduction is changing so much throughout the year, this helps us capture that change in reproductive activity a little better if it's done more frequently. And for this activity, there are specific ways that you walk through your monitoring plot, and you look at specific milkweeds, look up and down, look on the flowers and the buds and the leaves and the stems, and you record all the monarch eggs and larvae that you find.
Jennifer, can you go back to activity one? I had one question about activity one. Is that where you have seen monarchs or not necessarily? So is that?
You can do, we want you to do these activities either in a randomly selected space, being those squares on the Ohio map that I showed earlier. So it doesn't necessarily have to be somewhere that you see monarchs. In fact, if you only conduct these activities where you know there's going to be monarchs or you know you've seen monarchs, there's bias by doing that. And so this information is incredibly helpful if you're doing it at a place that's maybe you haven't seen monarchs before, or it's a different type of landscape that's a little undersurveyed.
Thanks.
Activity 3 occurs in that same kind of plot that you would set up at your space, your monitoring space, and you would walk around the perimeter of that plot, recording the adult monarchs that you see. Takes about half an hour. We recommend you do it every 2 weeks. And the fourth optional activity is the rearing activity. So this would be collecting an older instar or an older caterpillar from your site, taking it indoors and rearing it. That would just be some daily care until it emerges as an adult or until it dies. And that we recommend collecting the older instars because that older larvae has spent more time on your site and has a greater chance of being parasitized if it's going to be parasitized, or infected if it's going to be infected. So when you're removing it from this site, you're actually taking more or less the representative sample of what would occur on your site. If you run around your site collecting all the eggs, then you're actually eliminating the chance that those eggs are going to be parasitized, and we're not going to really know, it's not going to be representative of what's going on your site.
And just a quick question, Jennifer, on activity 3, do you do it at the same space every 2 weeks or different ones?
This is the same space. So all these activities would occur at the same space. So I haven't gone into a great amount of detail about how to pick that space. I do appreciate the question about, should I pick a spot where I know monarchs are? Part of the purpose of the program
I was wondering what was making that noise. Yeah.
is to get out to areas that are undersurveyed and underrepresented. If you are interested in maybe certain conservation activities at a park, that totally makes sense to monitor an area that you know is going to be changing or something. We also strongly encourage looking at some random sites, and there's a process online that will show you how to pick out these random sites, and surveying areas that are not necessarily established for pollinators. So that's filling in data gaps. We have been training people in Ohio for a couple years now. I put some stars on the map where we have some local IMMP trainers who have been conducting this protocol for a couple years. We've collected information in other areas as well, although those people are not necessarily training others, but we have information from Southern Ohio and Northeast Ohio. If you're interested in getting connected with a local IMMP trainer, let me know, and we'll share my contact information afterwards as well. Shoot me an email and I'll get you connected with someone who's already doing this program, and you might be able to shadow them for a day. We also have online training videos, so you can kind of teach yourself. And we're going to have field technicians in the area later this summer. And those field technicians might be able to have small outdoor group trainings depending on people's level of comfort and our ability to find the right space. But we might be able to have some trainings if there's a hot spot on this map that's not near a star. So if a bunch of you are down in Southern Ohio, we'll see there and have a small safe training.
Looks like we're having just a little technical difficulty with Jennifer. Hopefully she'll come back on in just a minute.
Hey, Anne?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't realize that I had cut out. So
just for a minute, it was right when you described the summer trainings for small groups in different parts of Ohio, right after that.
Okay, thanks. That's something that if you reach out to me, if you're interested in us bringing a training to your area, shoot me an email and I'll communicate with my technicians and we'll try to find a place where we can connect with people in a small, safe environment outdoors to have a training. I mentioned that some people have been participating in the IMMP for a couple years now. What I have on hand right now, this is 2018 Ohio data, but I thought it was interesting to pull up and show you some things that we're finding. So most of the sites in 2018 were randomly selected sites. And that to me is the most exciting thing because we're finding out what is truly on the landscape in Ohio. We're not just telling people what's in parks. We know there's going to be some great stuff in parklands, and we know you put some great efforts into maintaining those, and you've got probably a different list in your head of what's growing at your park than what you see on this screen right now. But when our IMMP participants went out to these random sites, they were mostly finding white clover. They were finding yarrow, Queen Anne's lace, black-eyed Susans. These are all the nectar resources, the most common nectar resources that they were finding at random sites that are really designed to be more representative of the landscape. We were also tracking milkweed density at those sites. So the only species of milkweed that was found at these random sites was common milkweed. We know there's a lot of others that do grow in Ohio, and there might be other species of milkweed on your own parklands. But when we went to these random sites, we only found common milkweed, and it averaged about 1,300 stems per acre, which is pretty darn high. I want to point out that one of these sites was self-selected, so one person went to the park and they wanted to monitor a site that had the most milkweed they could find in their park. And that totally skewed the data. That's okay, they were interested in that site, they're doing conservation on that site, and they use this to track it. But that, if you took out that one outlier site, the stem density per acre drops by half. So it really makes a difference whether you're looking at an area that's designed for monarchs, perhaps, or a randomly selected site. And then people also did the adult monarch survey, and in Ohio, we were finding a little over 2 adults per kilometer surveyed, or 2 adults per kilometer walked.
That's nothing.
It's not a lot. That was the least frequently done activity. I feel like if people had done that more frequently during certain times of the year, we could have found more. But it's also important to note that these were random sites. And so one of them was along a roadside that didn't have a lot of milkweed. One of them was in an agricultural field. It was like an orchard of some sort. So these sites, they're not hand selected to have a lot of monarchs, but what they're doing is they're showing us what's the density of monarchs out there in general. We've got a lot of opportunities to build your skills. So like I said, I didn't spend a lot of time here talking about the ins and outs of identifying a monarch and their biology and the resources they need. But we do on our Monarch Joint Venture website, down here at the bottom, have links to online training. And there's training videos for monarch identification. So if you're interested in learning more about how to identify the different instars of a monarch, or what an egg looks like, or telling monarch from monarch mimics, this is a great video for you. Then we have milkweed identification video too, that's really helpful if you're recording milkweed in any of your surveys. So we'll send a link with those resources to you. I just hope to leave you today inspired to be, sharing more of your valuable observations with the research community. As you probably know, being involved in this way not only advances our collective knowledge of monarchs and their habitats, but it's also an opportunity for people to interact with new participants, learn more about monarchs, and you can continue to inspire others through these activities.